Dudes, there's a full-blown mental health crisis happening, and it started long before COVID. Everyone will look back and they'll say 2020 was the year of the mental health crisis. It was not. It wasn't. In 2010 to 2012, two things happened to humanity that were potentially two of the worst things that could have happened. Everybody seems to be struggling with anxiety or depression, and there are very tangible reasons, both in the science and in the scriptures, for why that's the case. So let's get into it. Welcome to the channel, guys. My name is Ryan Miller. I love Jesus. I love mental health. I love helping people walk through their struggles. And today I want to explore why everyone's struggling so much, because the data shows we've never seen anything like this. This is unprecedented, what's going on right now in our culture and our time. And so you might be battling something. This is going to be helpful for you. You might just be interested in topics like anxiety. It's going to be really helpful for you. You might have a son or a daughter or a cousin or a brother or a dad who's struggling with anxiety or depression or any other type of mental health issue. And this video is going to tell you probably why. And the last reason, I'm going to give you three. The last one, some people might actually find offensive, but it's the truth. And I think the data actually supports it. So let's get into it. So right now there is a significant problem. I don't need to tell you that. I'm going to read some of these statistics for you here. But from 2011 to 2021, teens with clinical depression more than doubled. From 2007 to 2019, the suicide rate of those in their early 20s rose 41%. The suicide rate, get this, of 10 to 14-year-olds tripled and quadrupled for girls. Now, this next one is really, the first time I read this, I almost cried. A CDC survey found 60% of high school girls experience persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness during the past year. And nearly 1 in 4 made a plan for suicide. Now, if you understand the stages of suicidal ideation, you understand that there are 3 stages. There's desire, there's plan, and there's means. To go from desire to planning it out, that's a big jump. So 1 in 4 high school girls, teenage girls, made a plan for suicide. Guys, something's really wrong. Something is happening in our culture, and we need to be prepared for it, and we need to know why it's happening. Dudes, there's a full-blown mental health crisis happening, and it started long before COVID. Everyone will look back and they'll say 2020 was the year of the mental health crisis. It was not. It wasn't. In 2010 to 2012, two things happened to humanity that were potentially two of the worst things that could have happened. Number one, you probably guessed it, cell phones. Everybody is pinging at such a level of cortisol and anxiety. Everyone is so wired up right now that we might look at Gen Z and Gen Alpha and go, they're emotional, they don't work hard. Dudes, these guys are victims to their culture. And I'm not saying it lets them off the hook. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is we need to have a little bit more compassion to know that when you grew up with a cell phone in your hand at 7 years old, something's happening in your brain and you are on a level of cortisol and adrenaline that is not normal. That is leading people to really, really, really struggle. So that's the first thing that happened is cell phones. Let me read off some of the things that cell phones, I took some notes here. But there are a few things that cell phones do. It's not just, social media. We're going to get into that in a second. But the first is blue light. What happens when you are having a screen like this up to your face when you're trying to sleep is you don't sleep well. You know what happens when you don't sleep well? You spin out. I've got kids. I've got toddlers. Trust me, I know what it's like to spin out when you don't get sleep. The second thing, and this is really sad, is rabbit holes. So this is not just social media, this is Google. You cannot undo algorithms. So let me give you an example. If you are a girl who is really into fitness, which is a great thing, good on you. What's gonna ultimately be served up to you on TikTok and on Google and on Yahoo and on Facebook and on Instagram is you're gonna see some really great fitness videos that are really helpful for you. But what you're also gonna see is you're gonna see some videos that lend you more towards eating disorders or disordered eating. And you can't undo that. It's not like you can unwind habits online. You can unwind habits in your own life. You cannot unwind your search history, even if you delete it. You can't unwind it. The algorithm learns you, and if you start to like these things, you start getting peddled things that are helpful, but then you get a splash of things that are really, really bad for you and really unhealthy for you. So you get a dose of poison, and you get a dose of food over here. The dose of poison is still going to be really, really difficult for you to undo. And so, again, these are 10-year-olds that are hearing this. This is heartbreaking. And so as parents, we need to be really, really concerned about this. And we need to be on it with our children, because these rabbit holes will lead your children, unbeknownst to you, into a place that they don't want to go and you don't want them to go. Now, the second thing is, this is clear. Social media has been awful. This was probably the second thing that happened from 2010 to 2012 that I would say, if not the most damaging thing to humanity, was probably the second most damaging thing to humanity. Why? We have these little comparison devices in our pockets now that are basically showing us what life is supposed to look like. And it doesn't look like that internally. We see people that are so happy, we start comparing ourselves to them, start saying, why don't I look like them? Why don't I act like them? Why don't I have the bodies they have? Why don't I have the friendships they have? It's all fake. It's all vanity. It's all fabricated. It's all plastic. And yet, you and I, I'm an adult. You're probably an adult. We have the capacity to hold some of that, not all of it. A 15-year-old doesn't. Their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet. So we have young people that are killing themselves because they don't think they have value. It's tragic. It's horrible. And then also what I would say is, you have young people that have no true connection in their life. There's this concept called ubiquity. Ubiquity means you have all of these connections, all in the periphery, and yet you don't feel connected to one singular person. You're everywhere and yet nowhere. You're present to everyone. You're available all the time. You're like in a machine that never shuts down, available to anyone who needs you, and yet you don't feel like you have someone who truly understands you. That's ubiquity. That's the third thing that I would say. People are living into this ubiquitous, mucky, ambiguous society right now. And they don't know what to do with it. They don't have bedrock truth. And so it's tragic. It's tragic. And as Christians, we need to know that ultimately we come back to a bedrock truth. This is fascinating. I was listening to a New York Times podcast the other day where these two, I'm sure they're both liberal. One was a researcher, one was a journalist. And they're racking their brains to understand why liberal teens are 2 times as anxious and depressed as conservative teens. These are self-identifying liberal or conservative. And they're like, is it that they use cell phones more? The stats show that maybe liberals are on their phones more than conservatives. So maybe that's why they're struggling more. And I'm like, dude, I know, because my ministry is serving people who are struggling. So I understand a lot of these things from not just like a clinical level, but just like an experiential level. From just not a high level, but like actually talking with people and seeing how people think and seeing how that lends them to anxiety and depression. So for me, the answer was obvious. Liberal teens who are more apt to reject norms and say, how can I be progressive in my thinking and think through maybe things aren't the way that they're supposed to be. Maybe that there's a different option here. I'm not making a political statement here. I'm just saying that's the mind of someone who leans more progressive as opposed to more conservative. When you have a culture that is now peddling evils and telling you that there is no truth, it feeds into that mindset. So you start saying, there's no bedrock of truth anymore. And you stop, number one, living into the bedrock of truth, but then you start living into this moral, ambiguous, satanic, polarizing haze. That's what we're living in. And for a 14-year-old that has liberal thinking, they're diving headfirst into those waters. And so, imagine that. To grow up, to be constantly pinging at a level of cortisol and adrenaline that's not stable, that's not sustainable for any person, and then you say, I don't have anything to live into in this life. There's no bedrock. There's no foundation of truth. That's a really, really hard existence. And so what does the Bible say that we're supposed to do about this? Okay, let's go back to, like, those are kind of the reasons why people are struggling. But let's talk about what we're supposed to do as Christians. Well, when you look all throughout the scriptures, you see the concepts of anxiety and trauma and depression and loss and all of these different hard human emotions and circumstances. There's one theme typically that you always come back to. You know, Job said some really awful prayers to God. He was really, really honest and really aggressive in his prayers. But have you noticed that God commends him for his prayers? Because he took them to Jesus. In the same way that 1 Peter 5, 6 or 7 says we're supposed to cast our anxieties, to throw them onto the back of Jesus, knowing he cares for us. It says in Psalm 94, when our anxious thoughts multiply, his consolations delight our soul. So what's the theme in all of this? We are not able to handle this world on our own. We can't do it. We have a godless culture right now that is struggling more than ever. We have a world that's spinning out. People are scared of World War III. People are scared of COVID coming back. All of these different things. And we get to model a non-anxious presence because Jesus was sleeping in the boat when the storm was going on. So that's what we should be doing as well, is we should be so not worried, so not pacing around our living room. Why? Because Jesus is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. He's not pacing the floors of heaven. We don't need to be worried because he's not. And so, yes, I'm not minimizing. Yes, you need practical solutions. Yes, you need practical tools. I have a full ministry of courses led by world-leading experts that will help you walk through these struggles. You can implement this right into your church. We're seeing a lot of churches take advantage of this. I have one-on-one support with Christian coaches who will walk you through not just what you're struggling with, but how to flourish in this life, how to find Jesus in the middle of the hardships of this life. And so if you're looking for that, man, click the link below. Go check it out. Know that there are solutions, but it ultimately always comes back to knowing who's in your boat, knowing who's in your corner. This is why there will be a new evangelism. The new evangelism is to say, what did Jesus do? Well, first he met people's needs, he fed them, and then he shared that he was the Messiah. He got rid of the woman at the well's shame, then he shared he was Messiah. Meets needs, shares that he's the Christ. Constantly, that's what he does. We have a hurting and starving emotionally and mentally generation, and we have the opportunity to meet their needs. And in doing so, show them Jesus. That's our charge. That's our goal. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Please hit that subscribe bell for notifications. This is a new channel that I'm wanting to spin up, and I'm wanting to share more content like this. So it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe. And man, we got an opportunity here. This isn't a huge crisis we're facing. For the church, this is a huge opportunity to bind up the brokenhearted like Jesus did.